It's a pleasure to co-present here with Verizon. We had some exciting news that we wanted to share with you. So this is really a collaboration that we need in around inter-carrier automation. I mean, and we presented this last week. This is when we ran the POC in front of some analysts and the press. So I will start just providing you the boring introduction, and then David will do really the fun stuff, explaining exactly what we did. So just providing some background. In terms of market trends, what we observe is that digitalization is really expanding across all industries, right? So we are really used to order books through Amazon and getting them just in a matter of hours. We are getting used to ordering a taxi and getting that in a matter of minutes. And I mean, using IT cloud services as well. I mean, we are used to ordering those services and getting them in seconds. And we realize that as an industry, in the telecom industry, I mean, this hasn't been the case traditionally, right? So we are in an industry where pretty much everything has been very static, very manual, very long lead time. So we haven't provided this experience to our customers so far. So that's really the background to why we needed to really change in that model, and this is why we have approached SDN and NFB as technologies to deliver this change. I mean, in terms of mega trends in the industry, I mean, something that I'm sure will not surprise to you. I mean, what is happening? We see these 4 mega trends going on. So obviously the increase of bandwidth. So this is not stopping, will not stop anytime soon. So this is something to be expected and something that we have to manage as operators. But at the same time, the number of devices that we are going to connect in the range of billions now with IoT. Also, cloud becoming the default, also for our customers using really hybrid environments, multi-cloud environments. That's a big trend in the industry that we need to be aware of when delivering network services to our customers. And finally, the fact that our customers are going mobile. So in fact, mobile traffic, as per the projection, is going to be 63% of all traffic in 2021. At the end of the day, this boils down to two big requirements. One is capacity, so bandwidth, and the other one is flexibility. Okay, and we need to respond to those. And for the flexibility one, obviously we are counting on SDN and NFB in changing the model that I mentioned before. So different models that telecoms are following when trying to implement SDN and NFB. So starting with the very basic one, so the product-oriented one, this would be that approach in which we just resell a particular product, a particular technology. Imagine you just resell that SD1 proposition from whoever, right? So there is really not much value that the operator is adding in here. There is no orchestration. There is no mix and match that the customer can benefit from, but just this particular product. Then moving up in the chain would be this platform approach where the operator provides a set of products, maybe builds some orchestration on top, and offers that to customers that obviously get a little bit more value through that orchestration layer. It can have access to a set of products, but still is not really the vision, is not the target idea. So really up in the stack, we have this integrated ecosystem approach where really what the carriers are going to do is just building a platform, okay, an enabling platform that will allow new services coming either from the operator, even from the customers, to be added into the platform, to be consumed on demand, a customer being able to build its own services end-to-end just based on different components. Okay, so this is I think where we want to be as an industry in terms of bringing SDN and NFB. And this is where this collaboration with Verizon and also in the industry comes into play, because obviously every one of us is trying to build this type of services, this on-demand using SDN and NFV. But at the end of the day, a customer will probably be sitting on more than one operator in order to have an end-to-end service. And what we want to solve, the problem we want to solve in the industry, is how to extend this type of services beyond a single network operator domain. This is why we talk about SDN federation or inter-carrier automation. This is why we do a lot of work as part of MEF LSO to try to standardize. And this is part of the collaboration that we've done with Verizon in building, for the first time, we think, this bidirectional in real operating networks SDN interconnection. Okay, so now I will hand over to David, who will provide the details.
Okay, thank you, Javier. So let's zoom in then on the cross-carrier automation itself. Like Javier rightly pointed out, what we would like to obtain is give the customer an end-to-end SDN experience. So we don't want to that the SDN experience ends at the border between two carriers. And when we talk about cross-carrier automation, obviously we talk about APIs. Well, APIs is something that's not new. We use it already for years. But the way that we have been using them until now is more in a static way, using APIs that exchange information like quote and availability, information like status about provisioning of services, information like what's up with my ticket that I have opened. So we are not necessarily linking automated actions to the information that is being exchanged over the APIs. Now, this is exactly the next step that we want to take and that we are taking. So we are going to link automated actions to the information that is being exchanged over the APIs. Typically, and this is what we demonstrated together with Colt, the dynamic provisioning of bandwidth across both networks. You can extend that to provisioning of new services as well over both networks. And then you can start thinking also about scheduling those actions, because it's important to notice that the trigger for those actions does not necessarily need to be a customer that inputs something through his portal, but it can be embedded within his own network. And then those actions can be scheduled. For example, if you know that every last day of the month you need an excess of bandwidth, you can schedule that up front. Or even make the network itself, have the network itself make a decision about, for example, the network is sensing congestion. Well, let's make sure that we do then a rerouting over both networks. Now, next step is to take that also one step further and look at other functions that are right on top of the network services that you're providing, and take actions for those functions also within the end-to-end automation. And then typically we think about service chaining. For example, add an SD1 service to after service provisioning, or service chaining at typically virtual services upon provisioning of new services. Also multi-service, and this looks a bit like the service-specific slicing that has been mentioned already today. So do an automated trade-off between, for example, an MPLS and a public IP service, riding upon the network services that you are providing. Now, all of this has been made possible by adding this intelligence intelligent piece called the Orchestrator to the architecture. So previously, the static APIs were typically exchanging the information between the BSS and the OSS systems. By adding this orchestration, we can make this automation decisions. You see also that we mentioned the MEF LSO. I'll come back on that later, but it has already mentioned a couple of times today the importance of the standardization. Basically, we need to make this a scalable solution, but those standards, they also help us in hiding the complexity between the orchestrators at both sides. So we as Verizon do not need to bother about the specific make or implementation of the orchestrator of Colt. Now let's talk about some of the challenges that we are really seeing in implementing this. It's more than the technical capabilities of implementing the APIs. And some of those points you will recognize have already been mentioned in this morning's session. But first of all, both Colt and Verizon, we interconnect with hundreds of partners across the globe. And it's just not feasible to have proprietary APIs between, with each of them. So if we want to make this a scalable solution, then standardization is really a need. Now, a lot of work has already been going into the standardization of the North-South APIs. We see that the East-West standardization has been a bit lagging up to now there. Now, the next one, and somebody in this morning mentioned that already, we want to do something with these APIs. We want to have a benefit for the end customer. That means we need to be able to commercialize, to leverage on these APIs from a commercial perspective. And some of the challenges that we are facing there is that these APIs, you have to integrate that in existing end-to-end flow. You're never working in a greenfield environment. You have your existing infrastructure, you have your existing OSS, BSS systems. So you have to integrate your APIs in this system. But next to that, you have also existing customers, and those customers, they have different contractual requirements, contractual setups. To give you an example, the traditional way of contracting and billing access services has been whereby we invoice the customer upfront for the coming month for the access services. So we bill them up front. Well, in this more automated way, which looks more like a usage-based type of contracting, this is not possible anymore. So we will have to change that into commercial setup, whereby also the access part is being contracted and built in arrears. And it's not only about the billing and the invoicing, but also the SLAs will be impacted. And not only the SLAs between the service provider and the end customer, but also the SLAs between the interconnecting service partners. So, for example, typical SLA parameters that we think about is lead time, obviously, whereby previously changes were performed in days. This will now be minutes. How do you deal with outages if the upgrade is of a bandwidth, for example, is not successful? How do you deal with that? Does that count for an outage? How quickly do you revert back to the previous situation? And what you will notice as well is that once you are in a more automated way, you'll see that customers are going to perform those type of changes more during business hours. Like previously, bandwidth upgrades typically were done out of business hours in order to limit the impact. Now, because it goes automated, it goes quickly, more of those actions will be taken during business hours, so with potential higher business impact for those end customers. Availability of the API when for example, between interconnecting partners. So those are all new kind of SLA parameters that we will have to think about, to take into account. Yeah, and another important aspect is that, well, I touched already slightly upon it, but this is a journey. So even within one RFP for a customer, we will interconnect with carriers who offer this automation capability over APIs, but also with customers, with partners who does not offer that capability. So how do you deal with this mixed environment? You have to live in this hybrid world for quite some time to go. So, and you have to take that into account during your commercial development of this capability. Now, there has already been a lot said about standards and standardization, so I won't go into detail here. But I was happy to learn from the different ETSI speakers that they were talking about cooperation between SDOs, and this is exactly what we heard also from the MEF. This is exactly what we are also seeing happening in the market. For example, MEF and ONAP, they are joining each other's organization. So whilst at the start a lot of standardization bodies have been trying to standardize the same problems, we are seeing now more consolidation happening on that front, and I think we will see more of that going forward in this highly dynamic world. Now, Peter Konings touched upon this already this morning, but in order to show you that the previous slides were not just some theoretical reflections, Colt and Verizon last week did a proof of concept to show that this is already possible today. So we had E-line services, 10 meg E-line services running in both production environments. And we were, those E-line services had one endpoint on the Colt network and another endpoint on the Verizon network, and we streamed video from the Colt endpoint to the Verizon endpoint, high quality video, and we showed that video that on the video wall at the Verizon endpoint. As Peter explained this morning, we subsequently flooded this 10 meg with additional traffic up to a point where you could see actually the quality of the video degrading. And at that point, first Colt went into their portal. They requested a bandwidth upgrade from 10 to 50 meg, and that triggered the API with Verizon. And so the bandwidth upgrade happened at the same time end-to-end, both in the Verizon and in the Colt network. And then we did exactly the same, but in the other direction, whereby we simulated a Verizon customer. So we went into the Verizon portal, and we initiated on the second circuit also a bandwidth upgrade from 10 to 50 meg, triggering an API with Colt. And again, both bandwidth upgrades happened simultaneously, and you could actually see the video recovering. So as a summary, if we want to make this if we want to make this on-demand SDN automation a reality, give the customer an end-to-end experience, we should make sure that that experience does not stop at interconnection between both partners. We showcased last week that this is already possible from a technical perspective. Commercialization of that is underway and is expected for later this year. And we cannot stress enough the fact that the standardization is really key in order to make this scalable and a workable solution. Thank you.
Really cool. Thank you. We have questions for Javier or for Verizon? Michael?
Michael Howard, IHS Market. Fascinating. And your last point about we need standards. Oy, 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 which ones, how many? It seems like there's so many aspects to the APIs, but you say not more than APIs. There's different contract setups. There's the commercial contract between the two of you. Do your OSS, VSS talk to each other? And you did it just for a change in bandwidth, the most simple thing you can possibly do. You got to start somewhere. But then to really get to, I don't know, virtual CPE, service chaining, there's a bunch of other, to have a full relationship of automation is a long trail. I laud you for getting here. This is a big step just to get here. But when you say standards, it scares me. I mean, where do you go with that? How does it happen?
Well, let me try to give one. So, I mean, it's true that when you look at the full scope of SDN and NFV and you start thinking about adding NFV on top and service chaining, obviously this could become much more complicated and bigger. So this is focused initially on Ethernet on demand, because that's the scope. And this is being standardized as we speak in MEF. So MEF, LSO, the reference architecture, I mean, we've doing a lot of work in there. In fact, there is already an initial release. Some APIs are available, and we demonstrated that in MEF 17. Already using part of those APIs that are being developed. The plan is to have those available by the end of the year that can be used by operators. So the initial scope, I mean, you're right, maybe it seems narrow. It's Ethernet on demand, and really more complex services on top will come later. And standardization at the moment refers to that particular MEF LSO framework, in particular some of the interfaces, APIs, Sonata, Interlude, which are the East-West intercarrier APIs.
Great. We have another. Oh,
just want to echo the point that Javier made. You need to start indeed somewhere, and well, Verizon is active in a lot of work groups in various standardization bodies, amongst them the MEF, whereby Verizon is, for example, leading this work group on elastic E-access. But the work does not stop at this proof of concept, so it continues.
Would I be right in saying, just to relate back to what Enterprise Web was requesting, that by moving up to the treating the service request as an application, you actually were able to deal with this more easily than if you had tried to configure each of the networks? Because they're actually delivered over very separate types of network. Is that correct? So
Absolutely.
it's really by dealing with service requests as an application that you could do this.
Yeah, that was done in production, as it was mentioned, on both networks, totally different. Well, we are talking about services that took a few minutes just to be completed, obviously, fully automated, just the time it takes to orchestrate the network plus orchestrate OSS systems behind.
But then it has to link to load management, and at the lower levels, if you did multiple service connections, now you have some complicated. Thank you very much.